Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. The panel that has been comprised today, in keeping with the theme of dynamic frontiers, is a very dynamic panel. Joining me today, first of all, I'll start with an introduction of myself. Derek Inkera. I'm the Associate Director with Turner & Townsend, based in Kigali, Rwanda. Joining me is my fellow Associate Director, Stuart Tia, at the far left of the panel. Next to him is Wendy Chimwatan. She's joining us from EcoSteel, at her light gauge steel manufacturing company based here in Nairobi. Next to Wendy is Andreas Fruhen, who is a partner with D4 Africa with a very deep IT and tech background. Remember, I said dynamic. And next to him is Edmund, who is a consultant with Remax Consulting, also based here in Nairobi. So I think the theme of the panel is about beyond borders and unlocking the potential. So we hear a lot about East Africa and its growth potential. We hear about aspects of its young population, its growing population, untapped natural resources. We hear about the demand for tech, the demand for innovation, the potential in manufacturing. So, you know, what we want to do today is explore these themes along the lines of challenges, which we all know we've experienced in the industry, challenges along things like escalation and construction costs, challenges with skills gaps, challenges with manufacturing infrastructure. So our panel will be exploring the different themes that they, in their lines of work, have come across, have different insights and different perspectives on. We'll explore the themes through a series of questions, and we'll also take some time at the end to also receive some questions from you, our audience. So I'll start with the East African landscape. General question here is around how the construction industry can contribute to the unlocking of the potential in manufacturing and high tech. I'll start with a question to Edmund, on my immediate left, to speak to how the industry can contribute to unlocking this potential. Edmund?
Thank you, Derek. I hope I'm audible enough. Yeah, so if you look at construction, it's the basic building block of any manufacturing activity, and probably one of the first spend in terms of the capital outlay. So in order to support high-tech manufacturing, there are a number of things that the construction industry needs to do. First of all is localizing designs and use of sustainable materials, because a lot of the high-tech industries, they're either relocating from other jurisdiction, or just investing, expanding, but with the base out of our region. So localizing the construction of these high-tech industries is key. Then we find also most of them are concept designs which have been used elsewhere. So trying to use locally sustainable material is one of the ways we support the high-tech industry. So that eventually we don't get into a situation where the production costs are unsustainable due to challenges that could be avoided during construction.
Thank you, Edmund. Now, we've also seen sectors that have obviously grown quite significantly. There's been a lot of talk around data centers. It's probably one of the standout performers, I would say, in the high-tech space. But outside of that, we are also seeing other manufacturing investments in things like life sciences, in manufacturing. And I'll go to Wendy now to perhaps speak to the same question, how the industry can contribute to the unlocking the potential within the high-tech and manufacturing space.
Am I audible? So high-tech and manufacturing industries are very unique. In the construction of these facilities, the construction industry needs to be very specific. For instance, as a project manager myself, you have clean build protocols. You have very high quality requirements. you have collaboration that is required with specialists from abroad. So it's very important that the construction industry lives up to the need to provide workforce.
Thank you, Wendy. All right, I'll just maybe take a moment to speak to, along the same thing about landscape. We often hear about Africa being a unique market, and even within Africa, having different unique attributes, challenges, and opportunities. If I could just go to Stuart to ask the question around, are there any unique challenges or opportunities with opportunities for building high-tech and manufacturing facilities in East Africa compared to any of the other regions, which I know you've worked outside of East Africa? Could you just give us some perspective there?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Yeah, I think each country within East Africa is geographically, culturally, and economically diverse. So that obviously brings its own opportunities within itself. Certain investors, they might identify opportunities, but they might also have some reluctance there, depending on obviously what's being potentially exported from those particular regions. And I think also it's quite prominent to think about that a lot of Africa live in rural areas, but in Eastern Africa in particular, the cities are continuing to expand. I know we've had some discussions today about some of those areas, and that can only itself bring opportunity in terms of industry, jobs, and economic uplift as well.
Thank you, Stuart. So, Andreas, looking beyond the landscape and considering some of the key drivers of investment in the region, I know you've been on both sides of the investment table, both executing some of these projects in your background and experience in the tech industry. Could you just speak to what some of the technical, economic, and regulatory drivers are for the investments in the high-tech and manufacturing space?
Okay, so my background is mostly about like financial services, so maybe I go around this one. So I think it's almost like a circle, because we need to, the financial services have very strict regulations, for example, around data centers, around where data is located, and so on. So I think that is definitely a driver. But with this need, there's also coming more and more now requirements for technology. So where is this kind of built? Like are we importing all the infrastructure now? Are we building manufacturing or assembly lines at least? That is another aspect that we then see driving. So I think like going around this circle, it's like it's driven by a lot of regulatory aspects, but then also like because of these regulatory aspects, we now need to start thinking of like, are we now investing into bringing assembly lines for high tech towards East Africa, towards Kenya, making maybe use of the special economic zones that we just heard about, yeah? So I think this is a massive driver from an investment perspective, because if we bring all of this here, it's also a cost saver in the long term.
All right, thank you, Andres. I think just connecting back to what some of you might have seen on an earlier panel, we looked at the trends in investment, and he generally showed continually positive trend, an upward trend as far as investments go in East Africa. The one thing that was constant was industry. Industry between the year periods that were presented, industry appeared to kind of stay relatively constant without any significant growth. Of course, we did see data centers go up in terms of investments. But just speaking to construction costs and what the status is of that. As some of you might know, Turner & Townsend produces annual cost surveys. We've done a data center index survey, a warehouse index survey, and also our annual construction market survey. One thing all those surveys show is the construction costs are going up, anticipated to go up yet again. Stuart, can I come to you to perhaps speak to exactly that trend? They are going up. What are they telling us? What do you anticipate?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I think, as you said, across the number of surveys that we produce, and in the warehouse version, the ICMS that we produce, and the data center cost index, we're probably talking around approximately 15% uplift across the market for full construction costs. A lot of this is based on the discussions from the guys this morning that discussed the state of the market in terms of supply and demand, and obviously the foreign exchange rate as well. We've seen obviously price hikes for commodities that are used, metals and energy, and that is only obviously going to push the costs upwards, and it causes the supply and demand imbalances that we discussed earlier.
Sure. Edmund, maybe perhaps a word from you. Coming from your data center design and consultancy background, you're seeing some of these cost increases yourself. Can you speak to what some of the reasons are behind that?
Yeah, so what we've seen in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, the first big one was the COVID pandemic, where literally, manufacturing of critical components came to a halt. Logistics was severely affected. So there was a lot of backlog. I know of projects where orders could, move from a few months to years. Actually, I don't think we've recovered. We still have backlogs. Right now, if you put in an order for certain components, it's a minimum of 12 months. This is just because of the backlog that is being tried to be cleared out. Of course, there's a hot one at the moment. We have the war in Ukraine, which is has had its own impact on the construction industry. It might seem quite far, from where we are, but we are severely affected. Then we have the geopolitics. We have the war in the geopolitical war between the US and China on the microchip business. Literally everything right now is microchip driven. Literally everything. So you could have a car, but the only thing that is missing is a component like this. It can't be released to you. So those are the key drivers, that is driving up costs in the construction industry.
Thank you, Edmund. So hopefully it's not all doom and gloom. Wendy, if I can come to you on this particular question, further to the points that your fellow panelists have shared, are there any areas in which you feel challenges continue to exist in the sector and in the region, and is there any cause for optimism?
In the steel industry, for instance, I think he's just reminded me how there was a time when we only had 1 hour quotations, just 1 hour. Within 1 hour, the quote has already changed. So in terms of cost, maybe I'll speak about the cost of going green. We have a lot of investors and clients who are worried about the cost of going green. Of course, we're trying to reduce the impact on the environment, but it comes at a cost. So the cost of going green and definitely the cost of inputs such as steel is still quite high.
All right, thank you, Wendy. So you didn't give me the optimism I was looking for.
Sorry.
But maybe we'll come to that a bit later. Okay, so from an investor's point of view, Andreas, I'll come to you on this one. We've talked about the rising costs. That's obviously going to be a concern for any investor looking into bringing money or capital into the region. How would you address dealing with the pressures of protecting your return on investment? What are the key considerations for any investor looking to the industry, particularly in the region?
Well, I think mostly it's about the ROI discussion is not only about the CapEx investment that I need to take. It's also like, how can I reduce my operational expenditure? How can I optimize my whatever investment it is, my data center, my manufacturing line, my production line, and so on. So how can I drive this cost further down? I'd rather invest more into like my assets, and making sure that I have a reduction in the operational expenditure and the operational cost, because that will definitely drive my return of investment forward. So if I invest into kind of building management, for example, to make sure that I have much more controlled cost in this structure, I think this is an investment that makes a lot of sense for me, because I reduce my cost in this case.
All right. Thank you very much, Andreas. Wendy, outside of the market in Kenya, and you can obviously also speak to Kenya as well, have you had, from your background and insights, to tailor your approach to suit the East African market in any way? Does your approach change to investments, particularly in manufacturing, between, say, Sudan, Kenya, or anywhere else that you might have invested?
Definitely. We do have projects in South Sudan, for instance, where the landscape there, you have political instability, you have the Nile River constantly flooding, you have no roads. So with that, maybe I'll be happy to say Lightgate Steel is a really good product, because what it does is that you're able to fit a very large amount of in terms of square footage of a building within a truck, and you're able to go to Sudan and it's carried on a barge. So number one, we are using alternative technologies in order to achieve construction in such areas. Secondly, you also have to have off-grid power, off-grid water, off-grid wastewater. So definitely there, in regions such as Sudan, you have to tailor your approach.
Thank you, Wendy. Listening to you talk about off-grid power and off-grid water, I, for a second, forgot whether you're talking about South Sudan or South Africa. No offense to any South Africans in the room. Things will get better. All right, so just to wrap up on the question, Edmund, in terms of the costs of maintaining facilities, can you speak to what drives some of the costs in maintaining high-tech or manufacturing facilities?
Yeah, so the technology used is key. We are seeing a question where decisions are not made with the capex, where probably an equipment is cheap, initially. But in the long run, it ends up being more expensive than, due to, added operational and maintenance costs. So in order to, have sustainable maintenance, you really have to interrogate whatever you're putting into projects. Look at, all the aspects, the initial capital cost, and eventually, is the technology right? Is it easy to maintain? Is it easy to operate? So you have to look at all the decision in totality.
Just to push you on that or press you on that, in your line of work and in the industry, are those considerations coming at the right time in a project, or are they almost foresight?
We've learned the hard way. Based on experience that we've had, from previous engagements, it's now a key pillar. A lot of time we are taken to the task. You have to simulate situations. You have to, theoretically, put in proposals and follow it up, with the actual build. So the time is now, and we are seeing a lot of awareness amongst clients and investors. Yeah.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Just on the engineering aspects, and I think you touched on automation, Andreas, as well as assembly plants and those type of industries needing to potentially be invested in. What would you say are the potential risks and benefits? What does it look like in the East African context?
So generally, if you look at high-tech manufacturing or manufacturing in general, we've entered what we call the fourth revolution, or manufacturing 4.0, which is basically decision-making that are automated, highly connected manufacturing flows. Getting proper connectivity into these facilities is key. Of course, there are a lot of risks. We still haven't gotten to a situation where our infrastructure can support all this, but it's work in progress. So we can see a lot of traction on authorities, just to ensure that there is good connectivity. But that is the future. The future is highly connected flows, automated decision making. And this will even get more interesting when you get into the 5G era, where factories will literally be on the 5G mode.
Okay. Andreas, I did see you nod your head as soon as 5G was mentioned. I know you have something to say on the topic.
Well, I think, as it was said, like the infrastructure still needs to be built out to make this all happen. But I want to just take it back a little bit. It's not only about automation, it's also about optimization. Yeah, so if I could now start collecting data about my building, I can now start going into like aspects like how can I optimize the flows. Like in a data center space, it would be like the power efficiency kind of aspects in regards to my cooling and so on. So there is a lot of aspects that we can already do right now, and I think there is much more automation and the connected aspect coming. But I just want to say that like everything that we are doing right now still needs to have more infrastructure to be built. Yes, we have 5G in some areas of Nairobi. It's still not as stable as most of the 4G that we have. How do we roll out this 5G? Who's actually looking into this investment? 5G requires also more base stations, more towers. Like there's another aspect that we need to do around this one. So I think the connectivity aspect, low latency connectivity aspect is definitely something that we need to further build out across the region.
Thank you very much, Andres. One of the other trends I think highlighted in the capital, the paper on capital and incoming investments spoke to net zero and sustainability. I know that Wendy touched on the point a bit earlier, but I'd like to come back to the same question to you, Stuart, in terms of sustainability and well, I can't say age-old question, but certainly the hot question at the moment from any developer is it more expensive to be sustainable? How would you address that to your clients?
Yeah, as you said, I think it's the $1 million question, isn't it? Whether it's going sustainable is more expensive. I think we often look at price purely on a CapEx issue, and obviously to implement some of these sustainable technologies, yes, it might cost a lot more in the first instance, and obviously we were talking about earlier about the rise in construction costs, so they'll go hand in hand, and you might get some clients and investors who are maybe almost a bit uncomfortable to implement those because of the increasing costs. But when I think you're talking about sustainable technologies, yes, your CapEx might be higher in the first instance, but you certainly need to look at the life cycle, and we're not just talking maybe operational costs. We need to look at will these need replacing, and also I suppose the social and environmental factors that these have, and also I suppose political factors as well of having these implemented across certain schemes.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Andreas, maybe on the same point, and from your perspective, as much as you're not necessarily a direct player in the construction industry, you have obviously interacted with it. Any comments about how sustainability can be built into the industry, particularly around the type of structures you've been involved in?
Well, I think first of all, sustainability, especially from an ecologic perspective, let me go this way, is efficiency and so on. So in the end, it's also important where do I get sustainable energy from? Kenya has a massive benefit actually in regards to power because of the geothermal aspect. So there is a huge opportunity from a sustainability aspect around this one. But then the next question is like, where do I now place for example, like I think there's much more research and so on that needs to be done, like to be like placing, for example, let me call it out again, a data center in the right area, making sure that I might not want to put it into the, Mombasa, Kilifi at the coastline, because this is where maybe my cost of cooling might go up. If I put it further up, like where I have already indirect cooling capabilities and so on. So, for example, Nairobi is actually quite good for this one, but even further towards Naivasha, because I'm closer to, let's say, the power directly there. So I think those kind of aspects in the planning will make a massive difference also in regards to sustainability. And then for sure, like now I need to also consider how do I get my goods there and so on. So there are so many aspects of sustainability. But I think sustainability always comes with like the right amount of planning and investing into the time to make sure that I have identified the right place, the right size of this as well, and that I have all the processes that I need to take care of fully planned out so that I can optimize this as well. And again, the other aspect about data and so on that we talked about will also help with this one. And then for sure, power again, solar, wind. I think there are so many aspects around sustainability. Even water, very important water. If I'm thinking of like the issues around the water levels in Lake Naivasha, for example, yeah, is this something that we need to consider from a sustainability perspective as well?
Thank you, Andres. Maybe just to look at it from a manufacturing background and maybe to pivot slightly. One of the issues that's certainly been in the news a lot lately has been the economic integration, right? We've heard mention about the East African community as a bloc. It's growing in size, its market potential, etc. From a manufacturing perspective, Wendy, are you seeing the benefits around some of the the trade barriers being dropped? Are we seeing benefits around things like free economic policies being put in place that facilitate and grow your market size beyond the border of Kenya, as it were?
Can I be honest?
Please.
Andreas just said that Nairobi or Kenya has an advantage because of energy. How? The cost of electricity is so high. You have increased costs constantly. Steel, for instance, requires a lot of energy. And with the current costs, it's become increasingly difficult to have low rates. However, I'll be positive. It would be great to have an opportunity to lower manufacturing costs. However, at the moment, it's quite high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Wendy. Stuart, I'll just throw you a bit of a curveball. In your calculations of costs, in your dealings with clients, does energy factor into why you're telling them that things are actually more expensive than they were 6 months ago?
Yeah, I suppose, and it comes back to my original point, that these commodities have risen, and that's going to affect effectively the whole supply chain, and somewhere, all of these supply chain are going to have to effectively try and build that into their own margins. So we are then obviously informing clients, and sometimes it is a difficult discussion, to say the least, of these increases and the reasons why, and some of the factors of increased energy prices definitely is included in there.
Yeah, so you start to pick up the thread between the energy costs, the need for automation and efficiency, right? The need for the logistics to get to market, as it were, right? Even though you can fit, I don't know what size of building you said you can fit on a truck, but you do need the good roads. You will need the special economic zones and, of course, affordable power. We've touched on quite a bit today around the costs, the increasing costs. I think it's something that, as an industry, as a market, we all have to learn to deal with. Stuart, you've had to have this conversation many times. What is the best way to break bad news to a client around increasing costs in investments?
I think it's information, and that information, if everybody partners, and when I say partners, I mean from the supply chain, if they inform commercial managers, project managers, architects, whoever else, and everybody buys in to the fact that these costs have risen, and it's fact, the data is there, costs are rising, and they're going to continue to rise. And sometimes, as you said, it's an extremely difficult conversation to have with clients because they expect to be paying X, but actually they're paying Y. But if you've got the data behind that from whoever that is within the supply chain, I think it makes those conversations slightly easier, only slightly. But we do get there in the end because the data doesn't lie, really.
That's right. The numbers don't lie. Edmund, if I can come back to you. You talked about the hard lessons learned getting into the high-tech and manufacturing design space. Has there been levels of collaboration with perhaps partners outside of our industry here? What type of collaboration was that 10 years ago to what it is today, and what will it be in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, the collaboration was physical. we'll probably be able only probably just to do one project with the foreign partners. We are now having hybrid collaboration where with the advent of Teams, with other collaboration platforms, we're able to deliver projects successfully with specialists sitting anywhere in the world with us as their local delivery partners. So we are seeing this on a lot, where we are having clients coming in with a set of mature consultants from across the globe, but with the local delivery partners, the ones that understand local conditions, closer to site, understanding, the dynamics of, local project delivery. Going forward, I see probably 100% off-site collaboration, where probably the international partners will probably not play a role locally. Just midwife the project to a certain stage and let the local partners take over.
All right, thank you, Edmund. Andres, maybe a question to you. I know you've worked in the Nigerian market, you've certainly worked in Kenya. Are you seeing any attributes or characteristics within these regions that would point to an easier place to invest in and actually deliver a successful project?
Well, I think if I look into let's say the Nigerian market, there is still an issue in regards to reliability of electricity, for example. So I think those kind of and there are still some infrastructure issues. Let me call it out as well. In particular in Lagos, for example, I'm contradicting to the previous panel a little bit, but there are definitely some downsides when it comes also to logistics and so on. So I think the East African side, I think has definitely benefits. In particular, again, let me come back to this about electricity. As much as we have issues with electricity, but it's more reliable, definitely much more reliable than anywhere else. And let me come back to it as well. It's I think the latest number, it's 90% renewable, so or green energy, and I think that's a massive impact that we need to calculate as well.
Yeah, and very much compliments to Kenya to getting as high as 90%. So, Wendy, as much as it's not cheap, it is certainly clean and is helpful, I think, for future generations. I think with the time left, if I could maybe open it up to the audience. Have you got any questions, any topics you'd like us or the panel to revisit? I think the person I paid to come in and ask a question hasn't arrived. But let me thank, oh, there is a question, okay.
I have a quick question on sustainability. You say sustainability is more expensive. I would tend to disagree. But to expand, can you please tell us how much we need on the technical development? How much is more expensive? And so that's more to you, Wendy. And then going back to Andrea, what are the top 3 items that one, as a developer, should look at in terms of long terms, in terms of sustainability? Which would be your top 3 items that you will focus on, even if they are more expensive? And which one will affect quickly your ROI?
Okay, you go first, Wendy.
I should have been more positive. So, thank you very much. Maybe I should clarify that it is the initial cost of going green that is expensive. However, in the long run, it does have advantages, and it lowers your general cost. So, generally, going green is not that expensive if you look at it in a more long-term point of view. But you did talk about exactly how much more expensive, and allow me to give a figure. For instance, you have the cost of, I think make it small. We currently have supercapacitors that are becoming more and more rampant in Kenya at the moment. The cost of supercapacitors compared to just regular KPLC is significantly more expensive. You're talking about over Kenya shillings. It's about, from my experience, over 10,000 shillings per square meter, which is significant and adds to the bottom line. So the moment you have an investor or a client and you give them the cost of their MEP, just power alone is so much more expensive, and a lot of times they opt to go with regular electricity rather than green. Yeah.
So maybe just to add on a point, so the way you look at sustainability, of course, sustainability is wide, yeah? You have to look at so many factors, yeah? But going back, just dwelling on power, what we are seeing is there's a conversation that is very difficult, especially at CapEx, where there's a project cost, but deep down in your heart, you know that, this is cheap, but running it is expensive. We've done analysis of even chillers, just trying to an investment of $100,000. But there's what we call the TCO. We look at this investment over 10 years. You'll find that a component is probably 20% more expensive day one at CapEx, but within another 36 months, the costs have equaled. When you consider the OPEX from a power perspective, then another 7 to 15 years on the lifetime of that equipment is a no-brainer. It's a win now going forward. What I always encourage clients is there must be some form of accounting in projects which is not CapEx oriented only, where people can go into another room and let's isolate these components and look at even if the cost can have a minus in the CapEx with the TCO included.
Thank you, Edmund.
I think there was also a question towards me.
Yes.
Let me just go back. I'm not a construction expert. I'm a technology expert. So I might not be able to answer the question about what is the fastest ROI, and so on. What I can potentially assume is that everything is different. Every construction is slightly different. If I'm building a data center, it's very different to a manufacturing line, to a plant or anything like this. So I think what's coming back to what I said earlier is actually the planning aspect, and this is why my colleagues are sitting here on the panel, they are the experts. But again, from me coming from saying I need to now invest into this one and trying to look into what drives sustainability for me, there is definitely the aspect about going green as much as possible. The reason being is that I'm not looking into this for 1 or 2 years. I'm looking into this for the next 50 to 100 years potentially. Yeah, so going green already now will save us much more in the future. We already know that there are resources that are limited. If I can go green, renewable, the name is already saying is renewable energies. Yeah, so if I go already this direction, I'm already looking into a future investment that I'm taking there. So I think all those aspects are very, very important for me for a long-term sustainability approach, not only from an ecologic, but also from an economic perspective. I know I did not answer your question 100%, but again, I'm not the expert here.
That's fine, Andres. I think we'll wrap it up at this point. The first panel that's finished on time, so we'll accept bookings for next year. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.